Let's get centered. This week, our special guest is writer, activist, and Democratic strategist Charlotte Clymer, who joins us to discuss the latest on the Texas redistricting fight and on whether Sydney Sweeney needs to be canceled. Plus, Donald Trump fires the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because he didn't like the data, while concerns continue to grow over his plans for a massive ballroom at the White House and the lack of transparency behind it. And Brazil puts a former president on trial for an alleged coup as Trump and his allies try to interfere. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Jeremy Murphy and Carl Meacham. How are you guys?
You just see the tumbleweeds in Washington.
Yeah, tumbleweeds. Yeah, we're a week into August. Congressional recess is well underway.
Yeah.
Of course, the House has been in recess for a couple of weeks already because they didn't want to deal with the Epstein files, but the Senate is now also on recess after Democrats held their ground and no deal was reached on a series of nominees that the White House wanted confirmed. President Trump told Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, go to hell. But he did it over the weekend on social media, where, of course, he's prone to oddly timed rants. This is a guy who has not actually met with the Democratic leadership on either chamber since becoming president. Typically a president gets elected, they meet with the leaders of the other party, in addition to the leaders, obviously, of their own in the Congress. That has not happened under this president, and it's not normal. So he told Chuck Schumer to go to hell through Truth Social. But yeah, this is the summer recess.
You know what? I woke up this morning and I had very few emails, and I went through like a woe is me. I'm like, I'm so unloved. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's August.
Yeah.
Give yourself some credit.
Yeah, no, but on what you're saying, Luis, we've been talking a lot on this podcast about how Dems just, fail to use their tools, and they have not been able to frustrate Republicans the way that Senate Republicans did when they were in the minority to Democrats, right? But I think, you're starting to see some signs of life. Hopefully this will last into the fall. I think, Senator Thune was going to try to keep folks in session, hoping to get a series of nominations through, but Chuck Schumer demanded other things, right? Including releasing federal funds that have been frozen for medical research at NIH and foreign aids. He also wants the White House and the Republicans to agree to not allow any more rescission packages like the one that was recently codified and had lots of cuts on foreign aid that forced, Corporation for Public Broadcasting to shut down. So I think you're starting to see some signs of life, as I mentioned. Hopefully that will, become bigger as we go into the fall. There's a lot of important votes coming up that, you'd hope that there's a united front.
And Trump keeps complaining that there's never been anything like it. But, I would ask him to tell it to Merrick Garland, Supreme Court Justice, who would be Supreme Court Justice if not for Mitch McConnell sitting on his nomination for close to a year in 2016, which was absolutely ridiculous. That Supreme Court seat was just outright stolen during the Obama presidency. But yeah, they're at least using their authorities. Technically, the Senate is not actually in recess. I think they have somebody go in every day and gavel in so that they can also avoid recess appointments.
Well, it's really hard to feel sorry for Merrick Garland. I mean, the man hid under his desk for 4 years. He's sleepier than Joe. I think he was the worst attorney general in history.
Yeah, it's probably better he's not on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Well, in these situations, and again, you have the government funding bill in the fall, which is going to really be a test, I think, for Democrats as far as, what are they going to do? Are they going to, work with Republicans, try to get some concessions, or are they just going to, shut the government down? This is a really, interesting time. I hope it bodes better for their ability to organize for the fall. But, what's happening now is that, members, there's one member, as you know, the Senate is not actually in recess technically. So there's one member gaveling in each day to avoid the president from making recess appointments. And this has sort of been a tradition in the Senate for a while. You have examples like when Republicans started blocking Obama nominees with this kind of tactic in 2011 and 2012. But Republicans control the Senate. And I think they would rather avoid recess appointments. I think from their own side, it's almost like they're putting guardrails on the president.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting to me. I'm fascinated that they wouldn't just let him do recess appointments. It's almost a, dare I say, a check and balance.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's something that we haven't seen recently.
You touched on something too. Republicans, dig so low, and they always make the Democrats dig. Like you got to fight fire with fire, right?
You have to fight fire with water.
Yes. What I was going to say is, you touched on shutting down the government. That's a Republican ploy. I hope Democrats don't do that because, they're there to govern, not to shut the government down. But again, if that's your only means, you got to do it. And, it's kind of like with the gerrymandering thing. Like Democrats don't want to do that, but they have to.
Well, Chuck Schumer took a ton of heat last time because he went ahead and passed, a funding measure, despite a lot of opposition in the Democratic Party. But his point was pretty good. He just did a terrible job of selling it, which is that if you shut the government down, you're kind of doing exactly what the Trump administration wants, because then you're talking about a very small handful of political appointees getting to do all kinds of things without most of the staff in place that would otherwise be checking whatever crazy things they're trying to do.
Right. There's I think it's Frontline on PBS, and it's about the Supreme Court and how McConnell played the long game. They always had that 60-40, 60 votes to get a big confirmation. And Harry Reid went back to the 51-49 thing because the Republicans were holding up so many nominations. But McConnell said to Reid, "You are going to rue this day." And he did, because that's how they got their 3 Supreme Court justices through. They would have never been confirmed with 60 votes.
Well, the 60 votes has always been on cloture, which is closing debate. But just a quick fact check that Democrats didn't change it for Supreme Court nominees. It was for most nominees, but it did not include Supreme Court. That was something the Republicans later did. But yeah, I mean, McConnell has been better and smarter about frustrating Democrats than I think Democrats historically have been about frustrating the Republicans.
Having been in the Senate for 12 years, unfortunately, the trend that you see with Democrats is that they're reactive. They're not proactive. And even though, as Jeremy correctly states, everybody's priority should be governing, it's unrealistic to think that there isn't politicking and leveraging and positioning. And one of the issues that I think is going to be really important is to see how the Democrat, and you need to be united in order to do it effectively, right? So, what is going to be interesting in seeing how the Democrats can unite and have a more proactive type of strategy that has the White House reacting to them rather than having Democrats reacting to Republicans. And you're seeing this with redistricting, Luis and Jeremy. So now they're reacting to redistricting in Texas. So they're saying, oh, we're going to be worse than you guys are. We're going to be tougher. We're going to do it in California. We're going to do it in New York. We're going to do it everywhere. Why did it take the Republicans doing it in Texas for them to figure out that they could be effective?
Well, there are constitutional amendments in both of those states that prevent it. So like in California, they'll have to do a ballot measure, essentially.
I know, but it's that toolbox again. And what we talked about last week, right? This understanding that I think is necessary from Democrats should be that Donald Trump is playing a new game with new tools. And he's looking at the field in a way that people didn't in the past, right? It was limited to the framework of Article 1 and Article 2, which, we all believe in the Constitution. So, but he's playing outside of the Constitution. And this is something that Democrats need to adjust to and become effective.
And
Well,
it's not just domestically. I mean, I think it's important to point out that on the foreign affairs, there's a very ugly dynamic where the United States is essentially walking away from democratic ideals. You have a situation this week where former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who is essentially the Brazilian MAGA, is being put on trial over an alleged coup, a plot that was inspired seemingly by January 6th. And Trump has threatened sanctions. His allies, like Charlie Kirk and others, have been sounding alarms about Brazil and calling for interference, the likes of which we really haven't seen since probably the 1980s. Carl, you ran the Americas program at CSIS. What is this doing to our reputation, but also just our ability to actually work well with the rest of the hemisphere?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. What's happening in Brazil doesn't have to do with trade. There was an increase in tariffs, a massive one, 50%. The tariffs on Brazil are a political hit job disguised as an economic policy. He's not targeting Brazil over market access or unfair practices. He's doing it to protect Jair Bolsonaro, who is his political ally, who's now under house arrest and facing trial for plotting a coup. As you mentioned, the message is very clear. If you prosecute my friend, I'll make your economy bleed, is basically what the president has decided to do. And as you mentioned, this isn't foreign policy. This isn't U.S. foreign policy. It's coercion. And it's incredibly dangerous. The U.S. Is now attacking Brazil's judiciary, publicly demanding that it let Bolsonaro speak, as if due process and democratic institutions are negotiable. And this is a direct interference in the internal affairs of another country and another democracy. And it's being driven by Trump's personal loyalty, not any strategic interest. The sanctions even target Alexandra de Moraes, who is the Supreme Court justice overseeing the case. President Lula, to his credit, he hasn't backed down. And he approved the house arrest of Bolsonaro and made clear that Bolsonaro's legal case is a matter for Brazil's judiciary, not a bargaining chip in trade talks. And Trump might have miscalculated what looked like a routine show of muscle, right, that he's been used to using, is turning into a much bigger fight than he bargained for. And Lula's standing, which has been shaky, has actually improved domestically. His approval rating is up nearly 7 points in the latest polling since the government stood firm on this judicial independence. So just to wrap up, and I know this is pretty lengthy, but I think it's worth discussing. Brazil is not some minor trading partner. They export a lot to the United States. The tariffs in the U.S. are going to hit the U.S. as well, or U.S. consumers. More importantly, they send the wrong message at the worst time. Punish your political enemies, and Washington will have your back, and defend judicial independence, and you'll get sanctioned. So this might makes right kind of diplomacy. It weakens democratic alliances, undermines the rule of law, and aligns U.S. policy with impunity instead of justice. And it's just the new standard. Authoritarian leaders everywhere are going to take note, and so will our allies. And it just makes us really unreliable and very different than where we were just years ago.
He's turning us into a banana republic. I mean, this is like third world behavior what we're doing. And it's just, Kara Swisher, who we were talking about, she calls Trump a coin-operated president, and it's totally true. Mm-hmm. So it's really scary, especially Brazil. I mean, I hope they stand up to him.
Yeah, it's government by ShamWowie. Everything's for sale. Everything's based on transactional relationships. Yep. We should be praising Brazil for upholding its laws and promoting democracies, and here we are, like, basically asking them to roll back the rule of law. That's shameful.
They're doing to their former president what we should have done to Trump.
Yeah, look, the Republican Party used to be the puppet party of Reagan, the party of the shining city on the hill, and you're right, it's turning from the shining city on the hill to what was once derided as banana republics, And, that's a term used largely throughout the 20th century to talk about a country operated basically as a private commercial enterprise for the exclusive profit of the ruling class. And it's hard to argue that that's not what the United States is looking like right now.
Yeah, and it's not just Argentina. I mean, just Brazil. You're seeing it in Argentina as well, with the ambassador making statements to support the president of Argentina and his own priorities in the different provinces. This is a very different United States. We're involved in the local politics of countries in a way that we've never been before. And then we're using our might to leverage interests of political friends rather than state policies of the United States that would advance the interests of the United States.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And people noticed, and especially that a lot of the things that they were promised aren't happening. I think that Trump is feeling the impact of the big, beautiful bill not being popular. People don't like the implications for healthcare. Everything they're hearing about it is troubling. The price of everything is still high. And now they're hearing that their rural hospitals might close, that, all of the other things that it's done. Food benefits gone for millions. Veterans have been fired, or they're unable to get VA support because of Doge cuts. Kids are dying overseas while the Trump administration burns food. There's just the accumulation of all of those things is going to have an impact, and it's showing in Trump's approval numbers being the lowest that they have been.
I don't think Trump cares though about, the House or I read somewhere in the New York Times that Republicans are going back to their districts and getting booed in town halls. So now I guess the message within the party is don't do them. And it just shows that they're so short-sighted that the big beautiful bill is, I think, probably the worst piece of legislation aside from the Patriot Act ever passed by Congress. And it's going to be for the House. I think it's going to swing the House to blue, but I don't think Trump cares. I mean, it's his last time in office. He's never really cared about anybody else but himself. So, but when these House members go back to their district and they can't even get 30 seconds to talk before people throw tomatoes at them and yell and scream and voice their outrage, and the Republicans are like, oh, we just won't do them.
Yeah, well, that's been their tactic for a while, is to avoid the accountability. There was a hearing that was pretty ugly that's making the rounds on social media in Texas, and where the Republican who's chairing the meeting essentially tells everybody to shut up and orders security in the room to remove people who are trying to make their points, and tries to shush the Democratic legislator who's sitting next to him. Those things are being noticed. I think it is starting to have an impact.
Well, I hope that they're noticed enough to make a difference in the electoral cycle. I really do. I don't want there to be a situation where the opposition is always running a step behind. And again, the example of redistricting gives you an alternative that Republicans were willing to use in order to undercut, I think, gains that are being made by Democrats on the different sides that you mentioned, Luis, either because of folks thinking that their medical protections are going to be at risk, or just the price of goods going up. So they've decided to change the game. And whenever they feel that they're not doing well, they just change the game. I hope Democrats aren't just going to be reacting to that. They can be proactive as well and put the Republicans on the defensive.
Well, one thing we really, really, really have to fight is this idea where we're going to do a census in the middle of in 2025 or 26. That's really dangerous because it used to, minorities were always underrepresented because the census takers don't want to go into those neighborhoods, so they don't. But now if they have legal protection and literally the White House is telling them who to count and who not to count, that
they're going to try to not count my immigrant communities. They're going to try to do a lot of things like that. I agree with that.
I mean, that
Yeah.
can turn the House red for years because, they purposely don't want to count these people. And now it's going to be presidential directive.
Yep. And on that note, our special guest has arrived. Hi,
Hey,
Charlotte.
folks. How y'all
How are
doing?
you? Good. This is the
It's
gang.
another day in America.
Welcome.
Oh, it's good to be here. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to a nice freewheeling political discussion for a minute.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, Charlotte, it's good to have you here. You're a political commentator. You're an Army veteran. You're a term member on the Council on Foreign Relations. You've also worked for progressive organizations to mobilize voters, and your Substack is top 15 in politics. So I want to start there because I think it's such a fascinating platform. Obviously, that's where we host our podcast. So it's a little bit of self-promotion there too. But it's such a fascinating platform where so many interesting conversations are taking place. And one of yours that caught my attention recently that I thought was so good was the headline that Sydney Sweeney needs to be canceled. And, it's fabulous clickbait. It got me to click right away. But of course, that's not what you were trying to get at. And so tell us about that one, because I thought it was just such a good point to make right now in the midst of everything we're seeing.
Yeah, well, for those who aren't aware, Sydney Sweeney came out with this ad with American Eagle for some of their jeans. And she made a play on word during the commercial, or excuse me, during the ad saying that she has great genes, meaning she has great genes on and she also has great genetic material. And this is a joke that we've all heard at some point in our lives, always in an innocent manner. And so I saw, first of all, like a very tiny minority of the progressive community get angry about this. But I didn't know about it until I saw it on Fox News. I was scrolling through news articles for some other reason, and I came across a headline that said, Democrats are, furious over Sydney Sweeney's ad, which was news to me because I had spent that week, and I would say dozens and dozens of Democratic and progressive group chats. Sydney Sweeney didn't come up a single time. And to me, what this showed was that the Republican Party is yet again, in the conservative media ecosystem, is once again trying to push a narrative of distraction away from the Epstein files, away from Trump's abysmal tariff policies, away from the declining state of the economy, all these other issues that need to be paid attention to. And I think what I was trying to do was a few things. Number one, tell folks what Democrats are actually talking about behind the scenes, because it's not Sydney Sweeney. But second of all, I wanted to draw attention to something that I think is incredibly annoying in our culture, which is this distraction-heavy, clickbaity culture that focuses on the wrong shit constantly. Things that we don't need to pay attention to, that don't really contribute to a productive discourse, that wound up kind of driving us apart in ways that are not really helpful for our country. So, I think we need to fight back against that with some clever things. And so, when I did that headline of, here's why I want Sydney Sweeney to be canceled, I started at the very top of the article saying, actually, this has nothing to do with Sydney Sweeney. I think she's a great actor and she seems like a nice person. I have no opinion of her beyond that. But here's what Democrats are actually talking about. And I just kind of laid it out. And, I think that's our way of fighting back, because there is a tiny fraction of the progressive community who are just completely oblivious to how all this comes across. It's not helpful. It gets us distracted away from things that matter. I don't care what Sydney Sweeney is doing. I care about kids who are hungry in Gaza. I care about rural hospitals being closed down across the country. I care about 17 million Americans who are about to be off health care in the next couple of years. That's what should matter. That's what we should be talking about on a daily basis, not this ridiculous culture war nonsense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I am going to put Sydney Sweeney in the subject line of this episode because it does work and it does call attention. And I think you're right. We've got to use it as a leverage to actually talk about the things that matter, and to not let Republicans get away from answering for all of those things that they're actually doing.
But Charlotte, I think that's sort of the conundrum that we have, in that we want to talk about issues that make a difference for the American people, and we always fall victim to the clickbait, or that a critical mass of Americans falls victim of the clickbait. So I guess my question to you would be, how do we make the issues that are, weighty and important in the everyday lives of Americans? And I don't think that we have, the silver bullet, but it would be great to make those issues go viral. Why don't we make those issues go viral? I've seen our friend running for mayor in New York. I don't agree with all his policies, but I do, just for the record, but I do think that his use of social media and social media platforms has been exemplary. How to use that kind of approach to really stick to the issues that are important to the American people?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that's something that really the Democratic Party and the progressive movement are grappling with right now. We all work in politics, and I would say that 10 years ago, if you are a comm staffer for a member of Congress or a senator, and you get them a slot on Meet the Press, that's a big deal.
That's right.
That's a feather in your cap. That's something you can put on your resume later on, because that was seen as, where you go to talk to the American public about policies and ideas. These days, Meet the Press is completely irrelevant. No one cares.
Yeah. No
one gives a shit. It's the place you go where you trade talking points and you hawk book sales. And that's why no one watches. I think that up until the past 12 months, the Democratic communications ecosystem have been focused on legacy media way, 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 way too much. Meet the Press, CNN, MSNBC, trying to get an op-ed in the New York Times or Washington Post. It's not that these aren't helpful. And if you can do that, I certainly would say, yeah, sure, book it if there's availability. But the audiences are so small, and these legacy media political environments are so antagonistic to Democratic goals, and so I would say accommodating to Republican messaging, that it's wasted effort. And so what a lot of us have been trying to do lately, over the last 6 or 7 months especially, is start to build the progressive media ecosystem so we can get our message out to the American people. Because I got to tell y'all, if we stay in this legacy media infrastructure and keep trying to bang our heads against a wall, it's not going to work. It's not, because journalists have no incentive to criticize Republicans. In fact, they are disincentivized from criticizing Republicans and holding them accountable. And in order to compensate for that, they go after Democrats for the smallest shit. Things that normally wouldn't even, be a big deal. They go after Democrats for. If you see any given news story coming out of the Trump White House these days, that would have completely collapsed support for the Biden White House just 8 months ago. So that's the key right now, is building up that independent media infrastructure that is not beholden to corporate interests, that is not beholden to this ludicrous, absurd double standard between how legacy media covers Republicans versus Democrats. By the way, Democrats of all stripes. I'm not, I'm definitely not a leftist. In fact, leftists find me insufferable, and I find them insufferable. I wouldn't say I'm a moderate. I'm kind of in that middle ground.
Yeah, that's so well. You're in the right place. This is Center D, because it's Center Democrat why we came up with the name. But of course, Carl is a Republican or former Republican.
There you go. Yeah, I'm an independent these days.
You're part of the family. You're part of you're part of the coalition of reasonable adults.
There you go.
Yeah. There you go. But no, I completely agree with you that the media ecosystem is changing dramatically, and it still drives, though, a lot of the conventional wisdom. And so I think that's sort of the challenge that we have, is that the mainstream media does not, the audience is actually pretty terrible. You probably have, in the tens of thousands at best of daytime TV. Really, Fox News is the one that outperforms the hell out of the evening shows. And, they continue to get those big audiences, because what tends to happen is that conservative audiences, right-wing audiences, concentrate in specific places. they all go to the Daily Caller and to Fox News, and they very much limit where they're getting their information from. Whereas once you get to the center of the political spectrum, and this has been looked at in studies, and we've tried to address it for many years, that Democrats are dispersed. Some are watching CNN, some are watching MSNBC, some of them are even watching Fox, and some of them are not watching TV at all, and some so that dispersal has always been a challenge. But I think in this moment where you have the potential for people to create this media ecosystem, it does present, I think, an opportunity for us to take advantage of it. And to, I think you commented on this too, Charlotte, recently on your Substack, is we don't need a new Joe Rogan. We just need to be bold about the things that we're presenting and be able to,
That's right.
Communicate without fear.
That's exactly right. I get so tired of this discourse of, we need to find the Joe Rogan of the left, or we need to find the left manosphere. And I'm just wondering, why the hell are we trying to copy their playbook? Are we not creative and brilliant enough to do our own thing? Are we not smart enough and passionate enough to get our ideas out there? The problem is not that we don't have good propagandists, which is ridiculous. The problem is that we are so goddamn apologetic for our values, and I'm tired of it. I am tired of Democrats being wishy-washy about student loan reform, or about universal health care, or about the ridiculous cost of childcare in this country. These are all things that the vast majority of the American people care about. And we are so afraid of being called socialist or communist or what have you, that we always couch it in these really, dense, heavy policy language cocoons. We just need to get out there and say, no, this is unfair. The American people who, are, craving some kind of moral leadership that helps working class families will follow us if we're bold and not apologetic and actually fight back. But the problem is that moderates, most of them don't really see fighters in the Democratic Party. They don't.
Yeah.
I don't think they even agree with the Republican Party on most things, but at least the Republican Party will stand on business about what they believe in.
Don't you get pissed off sometimes because Democrats just seem to be reactive? I agree with you. You don't need to be copying what other folks are doing, but you do need to be leading in a way that makes the other side. And when I say the other side, these are Americans. These aren't like enemies. They might have different views, and we might have different views from them. But at the end of the day, we have to make this thing work, or that's at least how I've been raised. So the question to me is always, why can't Democrats respond? Stop being responsive and start leading these discussions and making the other side have to respond. And you mentioned a whole bunch of issues where I think that there's a critical mass of Americans that would want to see alternatives. The alternatives that the Trump administration is offering pretty much leave you alone, leave you out all by yourself. And it's only for folks that can afford these things that benefit from that. I don't know, how do you feel, or what do you think are the issues where we can be leading and making the other side respond?
Basic working class family issues. Childcare should not be so expensive in this country. That alone, I think, would get a lot of folks on our side. If you're a parent in this country of a kid younger than 12, you are constantly wondering about scheduling, where they are, how to pay for proper supervision or proper care, healthcare costs, for that matter. Just kids alone take up so much bandwidth of what most Americans worry about in this country. And yet we're not really bold with our policy proposals.
Yeah.
We're not. We always kind of say, well, working class families should be working constantly in order to earn these benefits, or we'll always couch it in these, Americans know that they want to work. Americans want to work. You don't have to make that argument. Get out there and just talk directly to what they're experiencing, like Mr. Mamdani did in New York. Whatever views I disagree with him on, he is exceptional at just getting to the damn point. He strikes the nerve. He says exactly what's on folks' minds, and he says what he's going to do about it. I think the National Party is not very good at that.
We've had an ongoing debate because, we're kind of two minds here, which is that he's the best thing that happened to Mayor Adams, who now has probably the best chance he's had since the Trump administration gave up on his prosecution, or pulled it back because of Mamdani rising. But I think the fact that Mamdani is actually addressing what people care about, which is everything costs too much, that he can probably withstand what's now been dubbed the Zoran derangement syndrome, or Mamdani derangement syndrome. I've seen it, couched both ways. I think he can survive it because one, there's so many more Democrats than Republicans in New York City, but also because the what you just said, Charlotte, that it's about talking about the cost of things and what people are being affected by right now, and he's doing that.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that folks are particularly just exhausted with this culture war bullshit. They don't want to talk about this stuff anymore. It annoys them when they look at their paychecks or their hospital bills or wondering how they're going to pay for rent next month, and politicians are focused on disagreements over value systems or over particular terms and which of the 19 definitions will best fit what you believe. It's not where the Democratic Party needs to be. We need to be focused exclusively on how to help working class families. That's how we're going to win this. And by the way, whatever people happen to think of Mr. Mamdani, he will be the next mayor of New York. He's going to withstand all this nonsense. He'll get a plurality of the vote. Unless Cuomo drops out or Adams drops out, endorses one or the other, Mr. Mamdani will be the next mayor of New York City.
Yeah, I think Cuomo's helping him, if anything.
Well, we've been saying some different stuff here, Charlotte. So I don't want to drag you into that, but we have a really good back and forth, and obviously it's changing with these developments. I think that Mamdani has really shown a resilience in the last 2 weeks, especially. But I think there's something that you said that's really interesting that I want to drill into a little bit, which is the culture side. The culture side seems to be what you tend to see more and more, or what you've seen with the MAGA world, and the contrasts to, I think, believers in small d democracy, or just mainstream Democrats. And I just want to, you put yourself out there, Charlotte, but the things that you're saying are really focusing on the substantive side. And many folks have said, Democrats could have won or could have done better. And you're hearing all these sort of revisionist views of what Biden should have done or what Harris should have done. How do you see this? Do you believe that the focus for an effective sort of opposition is to focus on these kitchen table issues? Is that the way to do it, and just not talk about the cultural side?
I don't think we should not talk about the cultural side when it's about life and death things and how people are directly affected. I'm talking more like, a debate over whether or not you should put pronouns in email signatures. I think no one cares.
Yep.
No one gives a shit. Why are we even talking about this? I do think there has to be a robust conversation on something like making sure that every trans child has access to life-saving, gender-affirming care. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me because that should be a discussion between parents and doctors. The government should stay the hell out of it. Everyone else should stay the hell out of it. That is a conversation between a family and medical professionals. That's it. That is something that we could make a very clear message on. And yet, last year, what we saw is that with extremely few exceptions, the Democratic Party didn't talk about trans issues at all. They didn't. Whenever I hear this, a pundit claim that Democrats should abandon trans equality, I just think we already did that. 2024 was a 12-month period of abandoning trans equality.
That's true. Kamala Harris was afraid to respond to the most damaging ad of the campaign.
That's right. And, the Democratic National Convention, trans people were barred from the stage. We were not allowed to speak. Sarah McBride, there was a big behind-the-scenes effort to get Sarah McBride a speaking slot at the DNC, and the DNC and the vice president's campaign wouldn't allow it because they were so terrified of even approaching the broad issue of trans equality, even on issues where the majority of Americans agree with the trans community. For example, that trans people should be allowed to serve openly in the military. Overwhelming majority of Americans support that. Democratic Party won't even touch that because they're so terrified. And here's my message to Democrats on this. I think if a genie popped up in front of me right now and said, if we don't talk about trans issues for the next 12 months, or through the midterms, I should say, we will save democracy, win back a majority of Congress, and be able to help working class families, I would immediately agree with that. I think that'd be great. That's a great deal. You mean we give up this sliver of our entire policy portfolio, and we save democracy? I think that's a great trade, and then we can go back to it afterward or what have you. But that's not what is going to happen. And I need Democratic officials to realize this. Let's say that all the current trans issues get settled in the next 6 months, which isn't going to happen. But let's say they do. Let's say the Supreme Court upholds Trump's trans ban on trans military ban, and gender affirming care is universally banned in the country. And trans kids aren't even allowed to join so much as chess clubs, right? Let's say all this happens, and we're allowed to focus on broad economic issues exclusively. By the time we get to next spring and summer, the Republican Party is going to roll out a whole new slate of anti-trans positions. It's going to be things that people haven't even thought about. Things like employers should be allowed to fire trans folks in any workplace, even though that goes against the Supreme Court's ruling from 6-7 years ago. It's going to be things like banning all gender affirming care of all types for all trans people throughout the country. It's going to be things like, trans people can't be trusted to purchase firearms because they might cause a mass shooting. So let's ban trans people from owning firearms. I know that people hear this in the back of their head and they think, well, that's unconstitutional. That would never be upheld in courts. Doesn't matter. What matters is the messaging in the moment. What matters is controlling the conversation. And Republicans see an open goal right now with the Democratic Party on trans issues that they can just score at will over and over again because they know the Democratic Party is not going to do anything.
No, but Charlotte, I think what you're describing is the way that Republicans went for weapons, gun rights. It's a slippery slope.
And immigration.
And right.
And border security.
I think the gun issue is one where, Republicans had a very clear conviction, right? And they weren't going to give an inch. And they've benefited from that approach. Here, what you're saying, Charlotte, is that this is not a niche issue. This is an issue that can worsen if you don't push back. Today, it might be, not letting people have their puberty blockers, or banning the 5 people that are doing sports, and making an issue of it. But tomorrow it could be something much bigger. If that's the case, I mean, that would be sort of a universal approach, to this issue that could get a lot more people involved. I just feel like there's a difference between tactics, right, Charlotte, and big issues. And I think on the tactical side, maybe the Democratic Party felt that this was something that was going to be unpopular. I mean, in 7 states, it was these ads that I think Luis is mentioning ran in 7 states, and they made the difference. And there was no response.
On the Super Bowl too.
Yeah, there was no response.
World Series.
Because of that fear. Yeah, and look, but
the way that you're mentioning it, Charlotte, is one that I think needs to be highlighted. Look, my parents are in interracial marriage, and they got their right to get married in the late 60s. If you don't push
you
back
were
on
almost
these
illegal.
things, yeah, I was almost illegal.
Yeah.
But if you don't push back on these things, the rights that are given can be taken.
Yeah, which is what we're seeing happen in Washington. I can't stress this enough, though. Like, if you look at 2010, Democrats in Congress were afraid of even talking about the Affordable Care Act because they were so afraid of getting criticized in their home districts, and Republicans did a very good, terrible from a moral perspective, but they did a good job of mobilizing their people to go to town halls during August of that year to scare the hell out of them over the Affordable Care Act. And so they were afraid to talk about it, and we got slaughtered in that November's elections. And the reality is that people have enjoyed and want to preserve that health care. You look at Mitch McConnell, the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare version in Kentucky, it's called Connect, KYNECT. and then ECT, KY for Kentucky, for those who don't know their states. And that is, a program that he has fought tooth and nail to protect because of what it has meant to his constituents. But Democrats were afraid to defend it in 2010, and they lost Congress over it. We can't be afraid of these things. It doesn't mean we have to agree. Look, I think that there's a reasonable debate to be had about, trans kids in sports. But again, it affects, maybe 5 people when there's 21 million people losing their health care right now because some of them voted on it. I had friends in Florida who told me they were really concerned about that. And I said, but you had kids at Stoneman Douglas when it was shot up and more than 20 kids died. Like, you should be more worried about gun safety than about the maybe 3 or 4 kids around the country that are in that situation. So, that is the difference. The number of mass shootings that have happened since Stoneman Douglas is crazy. There was just one yesterday at the Fort Stewart military base. But pretty much every day there is some incident where 3 or more people are shot. And so, we need to focus. We need to not be afraid to defend people and their right to exist. If you identify whatever way you want to identify, that should be nobody's business.
Yeah, but
Who
Charlotte,
is nobody's business. But let's focus on the big issues that are actually affecting millions and millions and millions of Americans.
But I want to get to this one thing with you, Charlotte, because I think it's really important. There has to be a story or a narrative that goes beyond sort of these cultural boxes to highlight the trans issues. And I don't feel that that's happened, Charlotte. I mean, you can talk about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the famous movie, from the late 60s, and sensitizing people to interracial marriage and interracial love, and I'm going to pick on that.
The birdcage.
Right.
Well, no one's attractive enough to be Sidney Poitier, just to be clear.
Right. But there's nothing that helps a regular American person who doesn't know much about this issue, and that just sees things being demonized on TV for whatever reason. The human side of it. People don't understand. They're just like me and you. They have the same concerns. They want a family. They want security. They want to do well at work. They want their friends. I mean, that I think is a blind spot that we have not been able to humanize this discussion.
Well, we look weak. That's what it comes down to. We just look very, very weak. You go to most members of Congress on their House members on their websites, the re-election websites, and somewhere on there they'll mention LGBTQ issues. Somewhere they'll say we, support the Equality Act or what have you. And voters in the middle, a lot of voters in the middle look at that and think, well, you're not saying anything about this issue I keep hearing about with, trans kids in sports or with gender affirming care or trans people in the military. And I'm wondering why you're not fighting back on something that is clearly within your policy purview. It just makes us look weak. I'm not saying, 95% of our messaging should be about working class issues, but moderates and a lot of folks in the middle, and even some folks on the right, need to see us at least fight back a little bit on this stuff, just a little bit, not a lot, but at least come out and say, no, this is a ridiculous thing. I think Republicans are trying to distract us by attacking trans kids. I would rather fight for getting all kids health care, getting all kids free lunch, getting all kids a kind of good shot at a public education. That's what matters to me. Republicans want you to care about, a few trans kids and, make us hate these kids just for existing. I want to make sure your kid is going to be able to have what they need to be successful in this life. But that's not what Democrats are saying. Because they hear there's some kind of headline about this trans kid was in this sport or what have you, and Democrats just completely ignore it, just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
and it makes us look weak.
Yeah, sticking our heads in the sand doesn't work. Look, I think one of the coolest things I've seen in my career was in 2010. I was at the White House in December when we had a couple of teams there that day. It was the last Saturday of December where Congress was going to be in session. And we were still there on the Saturday trying to get 2 major things passed: the DREAM Act and the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, revoking Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we lost on the DREAM Act, but we won on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And, President Obama came in to, he'd been working the phones all day. We had been working the stuff that we could do. And he came in to talk to, both of the teams that were working on these issues together and to both celebrate on the one hand on the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but to also, encourage us to not give up on everything else that we were trying to do. But what I took away from that was more the impact that it actually started having, because just about 4 years later, I'm in Europe and I met a bunch of U.S. Army folks. And, one of them was an openly gay woman who had only been in service less than 4 years, but was serving openly, had been making a tremendous contribution to the effort. And so had been promoted quickly, was serving honorably and making an incredible difference on that mission. And you know what? Had no idea of what other service members had to deal with prior to that. And to me, that was such a beautiful thing. And, I didn't even bring it up. I was just happy to see that, this individual has never had to deal with that. And they're out there making our country stronger. And, that's the biggest thing to me, is at the end of the day, when we start throwing up all these roadblocks and targeting Americans and trying to make some of us less than others, we hurt the country.
Yeah. And part of it too is just believing in the result, the long-term result of our policy proposals. I was at West Point when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And there was a lot of murmuring among a lot of conservative cadets that this would make the military weaker. Military readiness and unit cohesion would suffer because of the ADT being repealed. 3 years later, you had openly gay cadets who were in the senior leadership of the Corps, and no one cared.
Yeah.
No one cared. And now the idea of banning openly gay, lesbian, and bisexual folks in the military is just not even a thought. Like, not even Republicans are trying to push for that, because they know it would never work. People wouldn't be on board with it. We need to believe in our policy vision. We need to be unapologetic about our policy vision. We need to stop saying, excuse me, could you please maybe consider this really good idea I have? No, we need to be out front and say, no, this is what makes us stronger. This is what we should be focused on. This is the right way forward. And they're trying to distract you from that because all they care about is making themselves and their friends richer.
Yeah. And Charlotte, I know we're a little bit over time, but we had, you're a Texan. You've been tracking this Texas redistricting issue closely. So just want your perspective on what the hell is going on in Texas.
Well, speaking of fighting back, I am so damn proud of Texas House Democrats for fighting back. I mean, this has really given a jolt of energy, I think, to the National Party and to the movement overall, by showing that, we do have elected officials who will pull out all the stops and will not just sit idly by while Republicans ram through their most anti-democratic, fascist kind of policies. First of all, let's be clear about this. This special session was called to address the lack of protections for flooding, because this horrible tragedy in Kerrville, Kerr County in Texas, in which all these innocent folks were killed, most of them children, that was entirely preventable. There was like a decade of hearings and bill proposals in the state legislature to address that specific problem that would have prevented all these people dying, and Republicans blocked it at every turn. And so, Greg Abbott calls this special session to get the state legislatures in there to supposedly address this. And then he does a bait and switch and goes after, trying to gerrymander the hell out of the state in order to get 5 more seats that would hopefully keep Republicans from losing the House next year. Openly cynical and shameless. And instead of House Democrats in Texas, sitting back and saying, well, what can we do? This is just a representative democracy. They say, no, to hell with that. We're going to fight back. We're going to do everything in our power. We're going to be able to go home to our constituents and tell them that we did everything we could to prevent their democracy from being taken over by the most bad faith people in government. And I'm extremely proud of them. Is it going to work in the end? I think in terms of Texas, no. Texas GOP will eventually pass some kind of gerrymandering.
Yeah.
But what I think it's doing in the positive side, and why this is all worth it, It's getting the country to realize what the Republican Party is attempting to do. They can't win by the current rules, so they're just going to change the rules as much as they can until they start winning. And if we keep that narrative up, and if we get California and New York and all these predominantly blue states to fight fire with fire and increase their own House seats for Democrats, I think we'll show the American people that we're fighters. That we're not just going to stand back and let these people run over us.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it basically. Sorry, Carl, go ahead.
What's that?
Fight fire with water. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's true.
No, but I think James Tallarico is now becoming one of these figures, right? That is galvanizing some interest. And Charlotte, I think the point of pushback is important. And I think the issue is that it's not going to, and you said it, we're not going to win this one. But the issue is you got to keep the fight going. And there's going to be losses, but you got to look at the war, not at just the battles in front of you. Battles make up a war, and you got to win more battles, but you got to fight battles. And I think this is something that's really important, and I agree with what you're saying.
And it's building the public support.
This is our Alamo.
Yeah, and it's building public support.
This is literally our Alamo, and next November is our San Jacinto, just to be clear. But go ahead.
And it's building public support that enables New York and California to do what they're going to have to do. Because absent the action of the House, Democrats in Texas fleeing so that they could block this measure, or at least delay it, it would be harder to build that support in California and New York. Now you're seeing that. You see Governor Hochul emboldened and saying things like, I'm tired of fighting with one hand tied behind my back. And, Gavin Newsom talking about the ways that California can move forward. The space that these brave Democrats in Texas are creating is making that possible.
They're burning the fat off our souls. That's what they're doing. They're taking us from complacency to action, and thank God for that. And by the way, I love Mr. Tallarico. I think he's fantastic. His interview on Joe Rogan was a masterclass in political communications. And it's so great to see Democrats who are people of faith speak openly about faith and why they're driven by their religious values. I think we need more of that.
Well, and we have to call out the hypocrisy, right? Because, to flag one last piece that you wrote recently on your Substack, it was about the Oklahoma superintendent of public instruction who has worked on trying to get the Bible into classrooms, but also to banning books like The Kite Runner and others from libraries. And then, during a session of the State Board of Education, has pornography accidentally play on his television in the middle of this broadcast. And, this is the moral standard bearer of the Republican Party in Texas's education system. And that sort of shows the hypocrisy for what it is. We can't allow those stories to go untold and to not call them out on the hypocrisy so that we can refocus on the issues that matter. Because ultimately, if he's watching porn in his free time, I don't care. I hope he's not doing it at the office. But it's about the hypocrisy that they use to try to impose values that they themselves are not following at the expense of everything else that we should be doing to prepare our students to make sure that our people have healthcare that they need and that we're investing in the future so that we can actually, thrive in the AI economy that's coming.
And that's the distraction. That's the distraction that Charlotte was talking about early, right? We start just looking and focusing on these little sideshows and not on the main event. And I think Tallarico has contested these things head on. We've seen it in Texas. I hope we can see it now with the redistricting fight. I mean, now they're throwing the FBI at him. So, this is not going to get easier. It's going to get harder. But these folks have the gumption, and hopefully they have the moral and intestinal fortitude to fight this and just see it as a longer war and this being a battle in that conflict.
And can I say one more thing? I think Democrats should be openly saying that Republican officials don't care about Christ. I don't think they know Christ. I really don't. I don't think they know Christ any more than as being a convenient vehicle for getting through whatever they believe Christ taught which happens to be not at all what Jesus Christ taught. Jesus Christ talked about helping the meek, feeding the hungry, housing the unhoused, not being judgmental, trying to build community, preached against exorbitant wealth. I mean, I'm not gonna, be ridiculous here and say that Christ was a communist, because I don't think that's true. But Christ, as you read about in the New Testament, is completely the opposite of what the National Republican Party's policy apparatus happens to be. We need to be saying that out loud. We need to stop being afraid to call out their religious hypocrisy over and over again, because the more we do that, the more that especially folks in the middle are going to realize, oh, actually, they're right. Republicans don't really seem to care about Christ's values. Why do they keep talking about religious freedom when they don't care about Christ's teachings?
In their extremism, they look more like the American Taliban than they do the American Christian movement.
Well, it's about judgment. Their Christ is about judgment and punishment.
That's right.
And that's their narrative. It's not a God of love. It's not. No. I was raised partly in Chile and here, but I'm a Catholic. And these are things that are you Catholic, Luis, or were you Catholic, or do you have a relationship?
Sort of. My family's Catholic.
But that background and that knowledge and that being exposed to that, right? We know that the portrayal of Jesus and the story and God is not only this narrative of punishment and judgment.
Yeah, if you're using Christ to hate on people, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
But let me close with this, because I think it's really important. There is a great viral ad that's circulating that basically shows what's happening now versus what will happen in 4 years, which is Donald Trump building this huge addition to the White House, which is basically potentially going to overshadow the actual White House, so that he can have a fancy hall that he'll fill with lots of gold and lots of gaudy things in the way he's done with the Oval Office. And, this ruling elite class of Republicans toasting and, drinking, sipping their champagne, and people getting fed up with it. And in 100 years, schools looking back and reflecting on how this was just the end of that and the beginning of a period of healing. And I think the ad was so powerful and so inventive. But what was amazing is it would have normally cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and taken months to do something like this. Yeah. And the folks that produced it, we're going to link to it, is in this post, did it on AI and relatively quickly. And I think that's what's coming this election that's going to change things. That is, we're not just waiting for Democratic consultants or those high-priced consultants that are still trying to force you to put everything on television. The people are standing up and leveraging these tools to get out their message. And I think we're about to see a flood of really fascinating content that is going to help change the narrative. And I'm excited about that. Charlotte, I don't know how you're seeing how things are coming together for 25 and 26 as people look to mobilize the vote, but I'm excited about that.
No, I couldn't agree more. And woe be unto the Democratic politician who doesn't understand how much fury and annoyance and exasperation voters have with the consultant class right now. I don't think the consultant class realizes the rage that is boiling beneath the Democratic electorate. We can have a larger discussion, not right now, obviously, over the concept of abundance and whether or not that's a good policy vision. We can have a good faith conversation on that. What I've been trying to tell people as well, though, is that you're not going to get anywhere by trying to put abundance on a bumper sticker and, tell Democratic voters this is what we believe in. It doesn't work. You're going to have to outline specifically the suffering that working class families are going through and articulate how you're directly going to help them. Having this whole, we are far past the days of being able to have one word that captures everything in some very dense consultant language. So, I would tell Democratic politicians, just say what's on your heart, talk to people honestly and openly, and stop trying to focus group test every goddamn thing that comes up in a meeting with a consultant, because it's not working.
It's authenticity, Charlotte. There has to be authenticity. We got to stop looking for, we were probably kids, or I was formed by sort of the Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's not about that anymore. It's about these longer conversations. I think that you so accurately describe authenticity, speaking from the heart about experiences that you have that affect you directly and that affect others, and being credible. And then using social media as a platform to push that message out. I mean, I really do think that all of that together is where we are. And Luis, you mentioned this video that's out there. South Park is another form of protest.
Oh my God, the Christy Noem video that they put out, and I think it's their second episode with her shooting puppies. Wow.
Did y'all see the whole episode last night yet?
No, I just saw the clip on Christy.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah. Things are changing.
Blistering.
Must see then.
Oh yeah.
And I was not a South Park fan before this. And now
no. Me neither. And I'll tell you what.
I don't know who killed Kenny, and I don't care.
This. That's right. And I'll say this, I wasn't a South Park fan either. I'm still not a South Park fan. It's just not my vibe.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of Democratic politicians could take some notes from Trey Parker and Matt Stone about how to message against the Republican Party right now. I really do feel that way, because people want to see their leaders tell them, no, you're not crazy. We think this is batshit insane too, and we're ready to fight back against it and do whatever it takes. And they're honestly not seeing that from national Democratic leadership right now.
Well, it goes beyond, Charlotte. It's not just it's not partisan. It's like a very wide net that they're speaking to. And yeah, I think, obviously, the opposition, to be an effective opposition, they need to be looking at this. But I think that the messaging that you're seeing from South Park goes beyond partisanship. It just shows you how strange this time is, and it's making fun of it.
Yep.
And by the way, South Park, Trey Parker and Matt Stone are not Democrats or liberals. They are very middle of the road. They just, their thing is they like common sense, and they cannot stand hypocrisy. If there's anything Trey Parker and Matt Stone hate, it's hypocrisy from Democrats or Republicans, which has made them so beloved on a lot of the right wing because of how they skewer hypocritical, self-righteous liberals in their program. This has worked to our benefit now, because now you have Trey Parker and Matt Stone saying, this guy Trump is full of shit, and here's why. And we're not going to be apologetic about, pointing out that he's full of shit. We need to be doing what they're doing. I want to see Democrats do more of South Park messaging. I really do.
Yeah. And, because we started on Sydney Sweeney, just so it's on the record, I'm fine seeing her in any ad or movie.
Yeah, me too.
Keep up your career. Good luck.
All three of us agree.
Good luck, Miss Sweeney. We're rooting for you. You do your thing.
Good luck.
So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Charlotte. I think that was a very great conversation and necessary conversation. And we're seeing Democrats fight. So that's at the very least, there's some progress from where we were 6 months ago.
Amen. Hey, Carl, Luis, it was great chatting with you all day.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And for our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, hit that subscribe button, share, and thank you for your support. See you next week. Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.